Hello, everybody, and welcome to part 2 of Dynamics 365 TechTalk HR Functional Series. Today's topic is Recruit to Require to Hire process. My name is David, and I'll be your moderator today. We are broadcasting this session through Teams live events, and the audio can be heard through your device speakers. This session is being recorded on behalf of the Microsoft Corporation. When you join this event, your name, email address, and/or phone number may be viewable by other session participants in the attendee list. By joining, you're agreeing to this experience. The recording will be available on the TechTalks Community Dynamics page within 5 business days. If you have questions for the presenters or need support, please use the Q&A panel located on the right side of your screen. Our presenters will be responding to your questions throughout the broadcast and during the Q&A segment near the end. Thank you for your patience during these announcements. Presenting for us today from Microsoft, we have Rachel Prophet, Senior Program Manager. Rachel, over to you.
Thanks, David, and thank you everyone for joining. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be joining from. I'm super excited for part 2 of our Human Resources Functional Series. Again, for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Rachel Prophet. I am a FastTrack Solution Architect based out of the Americas. My contact information is here on the screen. I do encourage you to reach out and connect. You can find me on Twitter at Rachel Prophet. Check out my YouTube channel, Dynamics 365 Unboxed. Connect with me on LinkedIn or check out my blog at dynamics365lady.com. In today's session, we've got a few objectives. We're going to start out by reviewing the new request to hire process that was introduced earlier this year. And I'm also going to take a look at a process map similar to the process map that we looked at in part 1 of our series. I'm also going to be doing a demonstration of the request to hire process using the forms that are in the application. For your information, the demonstrations that I will be showing today are recorded and will be shown in the standalone Human Resources app. It is not in the Finance and Operations integrated environment, and that's because this code has not yet been merged. The functionality that I'm going to demonstrate in the user interface will be part of 10.0.25. However, the APIs and like the ability to use the integrations are not expected to be merged in until a later release. So you'll need to keep an eye out for the release notes in the What's New on the docs site to kind of know exactly when these will be dropping into the system. We'll also be talking about how you can use those APIs and considerations that you need to integrate this new functionality with a recruiting system, an applicant tracking system, or an ATS. We'll wrap up by reviewing those do's and don'ts for implementing this request to hire feature. And as always, we've prepared a checklist for you of all the steps that you'll need to go through if you want to implement and use this feature. Some things that we won't be going over today are detailed aspects of integrations. We do have another tech talk later on in our series where we're going to dive a little bit deeper into integrations. So I do encourage you to make sure you're registered for that and join us later in the series for the integration pieces. We also will not be discussing licensing considerations in today's Tech Talk. So with that, I want to go ahead and dive in and get started with that overview of the request to hire process. So getting started, I want to start with kind of a very basic process flow. Dynamics 365 Human Resources helps you manage recruiting requests. It also helps you seamlessly transition job candidates to employees. If your organization uses a separate recruiting application, your recruiting process might include the following steps. A manager can start by creating a recruiting request in the employee self-service workspace. Then you may follow an internal review or approval process before the recruiter starts to recruit. Next, you send that request out to an external applicant tracking system, or ATS. and you start receiving candidate referrals in human resources from the recruiting application. Finally, you complete that candidate hiring process directly in Dynamics 365 Human Resources without the need to manually enter the data in again. If you aren't using a separate recruiting application, you can also manually manage recruiting requests and candidates in human resources. You can get started with the new recruiting functionality by enabling the recruiting process management feature in the feature management workspace. This will enable the parameters that will allow you to set up and start using the new features. Once it's enabled, you will need to go to the Human Resources Shared Parameters page and set the Enable Recruiting Requests feature to yes. You'll find it on the new Recruitment tab in that page. So I want to take a closer look at the entire request to hire process, all the setups and configurations that are related with our process catalog. The request to recruit process is critical to finding and hiring great talent for your organization. Starting at the top of the process catalog for request to recruit, we have security roles. There are two core security roles that are used to grant access to the main functionality of human resources. These are the Human Resources Assistant and Manager. Another security role exists for Recruiter, which has limited access to some personnel information, including the new request to recruit and candidates. The manager role is also critical in the request to recruit process if you wish to empower your managers to kick off the process for requests to recruit through the employee self-service workspace. This is a great way for your management team to interact with the HR team and formally document the processes. As always, you can create custom security roles based on your business needs. The next section of the process catalog shows the business process and configurations related to the request to recruit feature. We have broken the processes and configuration down into three key areas: workers, candidates, and recruiting requests. Before you can start using the request to recruit process, remember that you'll need to enable the feature in feature management and then turn on the shared parameters. The basic process for request to recruit starts with creating the request to recruit, which can happen from manager self-service or directly in the recruiting requests page. Next, you'll start creating candidates. This can happen as a manual process if you do not have an external application tracking system. Most typically, candidates will come from your ATS and be imported through an integration with our request to recruit candidate APIs. When you're ready, you can hire the candidate, which converts the details into a worker, or send the signal through the ATS integration. Next, you'll notice that titles, departments, jobs, positions, skills, and several other things have configuration that cross the recruiting request candidates and the workers. The data starts its life on the recruiting request as a way to identify the requirements for a candidate that can be exported to the ATS and put on your job boards. Then, when candidates apply, you can keep track of their details and update the information for each candidate. Finally, when you hire a candidate, the details are copied to the worker, and you can continue to update and maintain those details directly on the worker. Focusing in on just the worker and candidate related processes, we have things like ethnic origins, veteran status, employment categories and types, identification types and issuing agencies, labor unions and union agreements, reason codes, and language codes. Many of these configurations are optional, but you will want to consider your downstream processes and reporting requirements when deciding which features you should enable. Hiring managers and recruiters can also be specified on each recruiting request. These are simply just another worker record or global address record in your environment. Recruiting requests also have the ability to specify education requirements. While candidates don't have education requirements, you can specify the professional experience that a candidate has. You also have the ability to specify compensation and location information on a recruiting request. Once all the configuration is complete, you can start managing and editing your recruiting requests and candidates. Again, remember, this can be done manually through the interface or through an integration with your ATS. You can choose to hire a candidate, decide not to hire them and indicate a reason code, or dismiss a candidate. Now, switching gears to the technical aspects of the catalog, let's take a look at data management, integrations, and administration. We've compiled a list of all of the key entities and option sets. Full details about each of the data entities and option sets can be found in the docs site in the developer documentation. While data migration for your go live may not include any or many of these data points, it is more likely these entities and option sets will be used for integration with an external system, especially your applicant tracking systems. Which brings us to integrations. The integration was built using the same API that you can use to build your own third-party integrations. We've partnered with several ISV providers when building the API, including Dynamics, ATS, and iSIMS. For a complete list of ATS solutions that are available with Dynamics 365 Human Resources, we recommend that you take a look at AppSource. Finally, we have the administration components. Many of these configurations have data points with the business processes that are related to the request to recruit functionality, but they may also have data points in other modules. Again, this is not an exhaustive list of all the system and administrative setups that need to be completed before you start using the system, but these configurations do have a direct impact on request to recruit, especially when creating and updating candidate and worker information such as addresses. You will also need to define number sequences to be used with recruiting requests and candidates. Now that we have a good understanding of the overall process, I want to switch gears and take a look at how these processes work in the user interface. Again, these demonstrations have been recorded using the standalone Dynamics 365 Human Resources interface. After each demonstration, I will describe what some of those differences are that you will see. They're mostly minor user interface differences in the infrastructure merge once all of this functionality is available over in the Finance and Operations Apps platform. Starting out with the manager experience, this is where your managers can quickly and easily interact with your recruiters and your HR department. So you'll start by navigating into Employee Self-Service, clicking the My Team tab, and then clicking the New Request to Recruit button. You'll enter in a description, select the job. In this example, we're selecting the Business System Developer, and then you'll enter in an estimated start date. Once you've entered in the details, you'll click Continue, which will open up a new window. This is the new Recruiting Requests page. Here you can see that we click Create Details from Job. This copies all of the details on the job that was selected to the recruiting request. You can update that information in the recruiting request page manually, type in additional job descriptions or details, and when you're ready, you'll need to click Activate. Activate is typically the signal that is used to send your recruiting request to your ATS system. It's important to note that there is no workflow out of the box for the recruiting requests. If you do have a complex approval process to start recruiting, we suggest that you consider using Power Automate flows to route the document through the approval process and then send to the ATS system once approved. Depending on your ATS system, there may also be an approval process built into that application. Additionally, it's important to note that there are no out-of-the-box notifications. You can use the alert role feature to send notifications, configure a Power Automate flow for more control of the notifications, or again, depending on your ATS, there may be functionality built in for the notifications. Either way, be sure to model your process carefully and document along the way. From a look and feel standpoint, differences that you'll find when we move over to the Finance and Operations app infrastructure and platform are really around the look and feel. The employee self-service workspace is still there and primarily looks exactly the same. There are a few minor differences that you'll see in that, but the navigation that you saw today should match when we move over to the new application. Next, I want to take a look at how to create a candidate manually. This is done by opening Personnel Management and clicking on Links, and then opening the Candidates page underneath Recruiting. Here you can click the New button to create a new candidate and type in the details of that particular candidate. Once you're done, you can save the record, and then you can start to fill in additional information on the other FAST tabs. Here you can see I'm filling in some personal information, and there are lots of additional tabs where you can type in more information about your candidate. Many of these fields are not required, but you might want to configure your system to make fields required using personalization in the standalone HR app, or once we're over in the Finance and Operations, you could use extensions to do that. From a look and feel standpoint, there are a few key differences. The Personnel Management workspace will actually have a different look and feel when we move over to the Finance and Operations app application. And so the workspace, if you're familiar with Finance and Operations apps workspaces, they'll look more like all of the other workspaces. All of the features, the tabs, the buttons will be there. They'll just be slightly rearranged and have a different look and feel to be more consistent with the rest of the application. The Personnel Management workspace will actually be found in the Human Resources module. So to navigate to this page in Finance and Operations, you'll navigate to the Human Resources module, and then underneath the Recruiting section is where you'll find the Candidates page. You can always use the Search for a Page bar at the top of the page as well in order to find any page in the system as well. So that works in both Human Resources and the Finance and Operations apps. All right, so next I want to take a look at the process for hiring a candidate manually. Similarly, we're going to navigate into that Candidates page. Once the Candidates page is open, you can select a worker and click, or a candidate rather, and click Hire. This will open up the Hire New Worker dialog. This is the same dialog that you would see if you were hiring a worker from the worker page directly. So there's no differences in this page other than the fact that you're accessing it from the candidate page. As you can see, we still need to select all the details such as the position. We can also select those onboarding checklists, and when we're ready, we can put in that justification and click Hire. Once you hire the worker, if you have personnel actions enabled, this will bring you into the personnel actions page. And obviously, if you've got personnel actions enabled, you'll need to complete that personnel action. Now, in my demo environment, I did not have workflow enabled for my personnel action. If you do have workflow enabled for your personnel action, obviously you'll need to submit that to workflow and go through the workflow process that you've defined for your organization. Keep in mind that personnel actions are optional. You do not have to enable those. And so the process flow that you find here might be slightly different depending on whether or not you're using personnel actions and or the workflow for personnel actions. Now, next, I want to talk about how we can decide not to hire a candidate and mark them as not do not hire. Again, we're going to navigate into the candidates page. And on the candidates page, you can select any candidate and click on Do Not Hire. This will open up a dialog where you can select a reason code, and then you can type in some details. It's important to note that those reason codes have to be predefined. So if you're going to use this Do Not Hire process, reason codes are required to be set up. Once you're ready, you click OK, and then you can see that the status is updated to Not Hired. The do not hire process is typically used when you've started an interview or screening process for a candidate. In the next demonstration, I'm going to show you how to dismiss a candidate. The process is very similar. Again, we're going to navigate into the candidates page found under the Personnel Management Workspace and Links. Then you'll select the candidate and mark Dismiss Candidate. This will update the status to dismissed. You'll notice that when you dismiss a candidate, there is no option to select a reason code. Instead, the candidate is just dismissed. Typically, you'll use the dismiss candidate function when you haven't made contact with a candidate maybe they're not qualified, they're not willing to relocate and the position requires relocation, whatever that scenario might be. Whereas the do not hire means that you've started to make contact with the candidate. And so we want to mark, after we've had discussions with them, we reviewed their resume or their CV and found that they weren't a good fit in that interview process or screening process, and then mark them as do not hire. All right, so keeping in mind, these pages will all be available in the Finance and Operations app in the infrastructure merge with 10.0.25, and you will be able to use the forms immediately. The APIs and the integration, which we're going to talk about next, are not expected to be available until post 10.0.25. So 26 or 27. I encourage you to keep an eye on the what's new in the release notes so you can know exactly when those are available. All right, so switching gears, I want to talk a little bit about those integration considerations. Starting off with a simple process flow. So when you're using an applicant tracking system, many of the functions of the recruiting process will be done outside of Dynamics 365. So this diagram helps us understand how that integration was designed and where those different functions will occur. So inside of Dynamics 365 Human Resources, a manager can either create that request to recruit directly from Employee Self-Services, or an HR manager with that security role for HR manager can go directly into the Request to Recruits page and create a new request to recruit. That information is then sent out and signaled through the Request to Recruit APIs to your applicant tracking system. This is typically where the recruiter will live and work. In that applicant tracking system, the recruiter will use the functionality of that system to review the position details, post that job out to various job boards. They'll find and screen candidates, schedule and perform interviews, extend the offer, and finally, they'll mark a candidate as ready to hire when a decision has been made. Once that candidate is marked as ready to hire in the applicant tracking system, that's when we move the candidate details back into Dynamics 365. Here we can review that candidate record and enrich it, add additional information, and once they're hired and they become a worker, we can start that employee onboarding process. So that's kind of a functional look at, where the different actions will happen between the Dynamics 365 application and your ATS system. And now I want to take a look at the data model. The data model is centered around a few key entities. The two main ones are the recruiting request and the candidate to hire. Recruiting request represents a request to an ATS system to recruit for one or more open positions. The candidate to hire represents details of a candidate who has accepted an offer for a position. Person, which is related directly to that candidate to hire, represents the individual who is the candidate. A person can have multiple roles in the company, such as a candidate, worker, employee, or contractor. There are example queries available on the doc site in the developer documentation on how you can use these different data entities, how they're related to each other, and samples that you can use for filtering and connecting this data to your applicant tracking system. I encourage you to check out those docs articles for more details around the data model. There are a few things to keep in mind when integrating with the Dataverse. The integration is designed with RESTful services using the Dataverse Web API, which leverages OData to write data back to the human resources application. The integration handles authentication, SLAs, batch processing, concurrency, and has error handling built in. You will still need to consider service protection limits, API limits, and Dataverse capacity when using the API for your integrations. In order to leverage the API and integration points that are documented, you'll need to enable the virtual tables for the data that you are using. I want to take a closer look at authentication. So OAuth is the industry standard protocol for authorization. After application users provide credentials to authenticate, OAuth determines whether they are authorized to access the resources. Client applications must support the use of OAuth to access data using the Web API. OAuth enables two-factor authentication or certificate-based authentication for server-to-server application scenarios. OAuth requires an identity provider for authentication. For the Dataverse, the identity provider is Azure Active Directory. To authenticate with Azure Active Directory using a Microsoft or school account, then you'll need to use the Azure Active Directory authentication libraries. Now, from an identity standpoint, OAuth requires an identity provider for authentication. For the Dataverse, again, the identity provider is Azure Active Directory or the Azure Active Directory authentication libraries for Microsoft Work or school accounts. Finally, it's important to note that you'll need to have an app registration. When you connect using OAuth, you must first register an application in your Azure Active Directory tenant. How you should register your app depends on the type of app you want to connect to. If your app will be a client which allows the authenticated user to perform operations, you must also configure the application to have the Access Dynamics 365 as organization user's delegated permission. For more information about this and step-by-step instructions, I encourage you to use the link on this slide, which will be available with the recording on the TechTalk Dynamics community page. To learn a little bit more about how that authentication and app registration works. Now, I want to switch gears and talk quickly about the do's and don'ts. First, for the do's. We do recommend that you use Power Automate for business process and workflow automation. Remember, there are no workflows in human resources out of the box. Once we're on the finance and operations platform with the infrastructure merge, you will be able to extend and develop your own workflows, but I strongly encourage you to use Power Automate as a quick, low-code, no-code solution to deploy workflows on these processes. If you want to maintain recruiters, if your recruiters are not workers in your organization, if you're using external recruiters especially, then we recommend that you use the global address book to manage those recruiters. You'll also want to make sure that you define and document your ATS integration flow. While I've showed you a simple diagram on one of the previous slides, we encourage you to make a more detailed diagram that outlines exactly what your process will look like. If there's going to be an approval process, make sure that you include those and put the swim lanes in and make sure that you understand which system different actions will be done in to help you in that process of developing your integration and visualizing what that process flow is. Some things not to do, we just have one for today, is don't use an unmanaged solution for any of your Dataverse extensions. Because the APIs are developed on the Dataverse, it is likely that you may need to extend the Dataverse to support your particular ATS. And in the event that you do extend that Dataverse, make sure that you're using managed solutions. So now I want to switch gears and take a look at our checklist and resources that we have compiled. So the checklist that we've pulled together for you today, we've got hyperlinks. Again, this slide with all of the links will be available on the TechTalk community dynamics page. But the steps that you're going to want to follow first is you need to enable those recruiting requests. So we took a look at that at the beginning with the feature management and the human resources shared parameters. Next, you'll want to configure recruiting request locations. This is an optional step. It's not required. If you are planning to use those locations allow you to define where you're recruiting a particular candidate into. So if you've got multiple offices and, let's say some of our job posts we're going to recruit into Redmond and some we're going to post and hire into our Atlanta office, that would be examples of how you might use those locations. The components of a job are all of the related setups, and we talked about those in more detail during part 1 of our Tech Talk. These are all of the things like skills, education, so on. So this docs article talks through all of those additional setups that you need for your jobs, because you do have to have jobs. When you create a candidate, you do need to select which job you're hiring that candidate for. The better job you do setting up your jobs and all of those various components, the better and easier your integration with your ATS is going to be. However, if you're planning to manage and maintain that data directly in your ATS, you might not set up some of those details and just have very basic shells of jobs, and all of those details are maintained in the ATS. However, I would encourage you to bring those details into Dynamics 365 to create more consistency. You will need to define your number sequences for the request to recruit process. So there's 2 number sequences that are required. You'll set those up in the parameters page on the number sequences tab. Then you're ready to start adding recruiting requests. Remembering that you can add recruiting requests in a few different ways. So a recruiting request can be added directly through the employee self-service workspace by a manager on the My Team tab, or a recruiting request can be added directly in the recruiting request page by someone who has that human resources manager page. After you've created those recruiting requests, you can start viewing and managing those recruiting requests in the system. So that's where you can enrich those details manually. And if you are integrating with an applicant's tracking system, the integration link here will take you to the docs article that has a lot of details on how to configure, set up the queries, all of the data model, everything that we talked about today, how to kind of get started with integrating. And then again, once you start bringing those candidates back into the system, you can view and manage those candidates directly in the application, and then you start that hiring process. The hiring process is obviously the final step, and we did actually talk about that in our personnel management part 1 of the Tech Talk. So taking a look at some resources for you today, If you would like to get started with human resources, we encourage you to get a free trial. If you don't already have an environment, you can learn about human resources on the Learn site. So there is a learning path. That first link here will take you right to that learning path where you can learn the fundamentals. And then we also have our Tech Talks. And so there's a link here directly to those human resources Tech Talks. Excuse me. And then the last link that we have for you today is the Dynamics 365 Human Resources documentation. So this link here will take you directly to the docs articles out on the docs website. So with that, we are going to open it up for questions. I do see that we've had quite a few questions coming in today. So let's take a look. We've got a couple that haven't been answered, and then I'll probably go back and review a few of the existing documents. So does hiring candidates copy attachments to the newly created employee record? This is a great question. This is a question that we get even in F&O through a lot of different types of documents. So when you put attachments on a record in human resources or finance and operations, those records are linked to a specific record and a specific table. So if you're attaching to a candidate, they're linked to the candidate. Out of the box, we do not copy those attachments or move those attachments to another record. So the basic answer to your question is out of the box, no, we don't do that. So I'm guessing that the question that says, can we maintain pre-onboarding documents is maybe along the same lines, but it's not super clear to us what exactly you mean. So if you want to clarify your question, can we maintain pre-onboarding documents? We'll try to get that question answered. We just had another one come in. It says, is the hiring process somehow linked with LinkedIn? So the open position can be showed via LinkedIn and the candidates can introduce himself and everything goes directly into Dynamics HR. This is a great question. We do have currently, if you're already using it, an integration available with LinkedIn Talent Hub. However, the LinkedIn Talent Hub integration is being deprecated and will no longer be available after December 31st. Using the APIs, if you are using LinkedIn Talent Hub or any other ATS or job board, you can certainly use those APIs to build out your own integration. LinkedIn Talent Hub does have open APIs that you can use. However, the integration that we had built with LinkedIn is being deprecated in favor of you can use those APIs to do your own integrations. All right, so I know we had several other questions that came through that we've answered in the chat. So I'm going to kind of go through those. So Victor had asked, when will the full feature of Dynamics 365 Human Resources be available in the finance and operations infrastructure? And Sheila, thank you for answering that. It is planned for 10.0.26. And Sheila, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of the functionality is planned to be merged in 10.0.25, but there are a number of features that will not be available until 26. Is that correct?
Yep, specifically leave and benefits will be 10.0.26. And then some additional entities will come later. The majority of everything for personnel management and kind of your core part of the application will be 10.0.25.
Thank you for that. We had another question come in. How can we have components or CTC breakup on application level? I'm not sure I understand the question, and maybe if I would have seen it when I was talking about it, I would have understood the context. So whoever typed in that question, if you want to kind of give us a little bit more detail on that. I don't know if Sheila or Angela, if you have an idea what they mean by this. I'm not really clear on the question.
I'm not either.
Okay, so whoever put that question in, if you could try to clarify that question or put a new question in, we will try to get that answered for you. So someone asked, will the recruitment functionality that is in finance and operations still be available? As Sheila did answer that for us, thank you, Sheila. Yes, that functionality will still be available to use the recruitment functionality, recruitment projects, and so on that are available. All right, so it looks like we might have a few new ones. So someone asked, does Dynamics 365 run on top of Dataverse or on a SQL Server database like finance and operations? So the standalone application that you use today does run on an Azure SQL database, and the backend code is X++, much like finance and operations. We do have a Dataverse integration. It's referred to as like the Dataverse sync. It used to be called the CDS sync. It is not the same functionality that like dual write uses that you might be familiar with in F&O. So I guess the answer is it's a little bit of both. There are certainly some differences in the infrastructure between human resources and finance and operations. Once the infrastructure merge is completed, later on next year in the springtime, then we will start that migration process to move everybody off of the current infrastructure into the finance and operations infrastructure. Dynamics 365 Human Resources will still be its own application and will still, use the same functionality that you have today. All the functionality that exists in the human resources module that's in F&O today will also still be available. You'll have to use feature management to decide which features you want to enable or disable. So hopefully that answers the question. All right, someone asked, does Dynamics 365 Human Resources support dual write between SQL and Dataverse? So in the standalone application that we have today, Dynamics 365 Human Resources that's available, dual write is not supported between HR and a Dataverse. However, if you also have finance and operations, you can dual write data from your finance and operations, and that could include worker data, for example, from finance and operations into a Dataverse. And if that Dataverse is the same environment that your human resources standalone environment is connected to, then that data does have the capability of making two hops. However, the write from finance and operations to the Dataverse is dual write, and the write from the Dataverse back into human resources is our Dataverse sync. So it's a little bit different. We do have a docs article that talks about some do's and don'ts around that. There are limitations. Our preferred method for integrating between Dynamics 365 Human Resources and Finance and Operations today is to use the data integrator. However, it is possible that you can use dual write today. Once we move over to the Finance and Operations infrastructure, you will be able to use dual write with human resources data, because we will be on the same infrastructure and all of those dual write configuration screens will be available in your human resources applications. Somebody asked, does Dynamics 365 HR include a Dynamics 365 ATS, or does it always have to be a third-party ATS? Great question. A few years ago, we did have a first-party recruiting system. However, that attract and onboard applications, which you might be familiar with, were deprecated. Those are no longer available. So at this point, you do need to have a third-party applicant tracking system. There are a variety of them. I mentioned Dynamics ATS and iCIMS as two that we worked with when we were building our ATS, our APIs rather. So Dynamics ATS, while it sounds like it might be part of Dynamics 365, it is actually a third-party ISV solution. So that can be a little bit confusing because they named it very cleverly. Hopefully that answers the question. If not, feel free to type in another one. Someone asked, we use ADP as an ATS and for managing employee data. I checked the app source and I don't see it listed there. Do you know if there's an integration with ADP? I do know that we are working with ADP. I am not sure that the ADP integration is available yet. And I might have to follow up with this one. If you want to reply back in with your contact information, or if you want to email me directly, I will try to get a more specific answer. We might only be working with ADP on the payroll APIs, not on the recruiting ATS APIs. If you can get us your contact information, or if you want to reach out to me directly, I will reach out to the program manager, unless Sheila or Angela, if you know off the top of your head. I do know that we're working with them, but it might only be with the payroll APIs.
I think it's for now with the payroll APIs only at this point for our current focus, for the short-term focus, but I don't know long-term if we plan to expand that, so we'll have to follow up.
Yeah. Great question, though. All right, so somebody asked, for internal Microsoft folks that have demo environments, do you know if .26 will require deploying a new environment? I'm going to answer this question not just for internal Microsoft folks, but for everyone. If you are a partner and you have a demo environment today with human resources, or a customer, and you're testing and you want to see the new version, etc., yes, it will require that you deploy a new environment, because that environment will actually need to be deployed in a different LCS project. If you actually have finance and operations already, you can simply apply the .26 update to your finance and operations environment and enable those features. If you are a standalone HR environment and you don't have a finance and operations LCS project, you would need to create a finance and operations LCS project and deploy your environment. We will have migration tools available later. So, for non-demo type environments, we'll have migration tools to migrate your sandbox and production environments. Those are expected to be available in the springtime of next year. All right. So someone asked, can we define CTC, which I believe stands for cost to company breakup at application, prior to converting candidate to employee? So on the candidate records that we have today in Dynamics 365 Human Resources, we don't have any cost information or tabs around that information. If you are using finance and operations, there is position budgeting available over there. However, that's not really related to the candidates. I think you'd need to do an extension or a customization to get that functionality. It's great feedback. I'd certainly suggest that you add this to the ideas site, so we can see if this is something that other people are interested in for our product team. But at this point, we don't have any functionality like this. All right, so someone asked, a bit on a tangent, is payroll still going to be available only for US and Canada? Great question. Payroll in the Finance and Operations app is still only available for US and Canada. However, we have announced, and I don't want to call it the deprecation because we are not planning to remove the functionality, but we have announced the sunset of support for payroll. So we did extend that. I don't know, Sheila, if you know off the top of your head exactly the dates that we extended that to, but yeah, I want to say it's the end of 2024. It was originally the end of 2022, I believe. we have extended the support for payroll in the Finance and Operations app. However, we plan to stop supporting it and doing tax updates in the near future. So, you know, from a FastTrack perspective, our recommendation is that we don't recommend that you start implementing a new payroll system in Finance and Operations. Instead, you should be looking to use a third-party payroll system and integrating that using our new APIs.
I did look, support's extended through July 31st, 2024 for the payroll tax updates.
There you have it. So July of 2024. Thank you, Sheila. The next question we have here, how are applicants and candidates going to work in F&O? Will one replace the other? Great question. Applicants is a entity in a table of forms, etc., that exist with the existing recruitment functionality in F&O. Those will still exist. Candidates will be its own entity, its own tables. They are not replacing each other. So really, you'll need to decide which one you want to use, one or the other. And you'll enable those, you know, which ones you want to use through feature management and parameters. And if you're currently using the recruitment and applicants functionality and you want to move to the candidates functionality, you can certainly do that by, you know, using data management, exporting that data, reshaping the data to the new shape, and then re-uploading it. As far as I know, we are not planning any sort of migration between those two pieces of functionality. This looks more like a comment than a question. I'm not really sure what the question is. I'll read it out loud. So if you want to clarify this a little bit further, we'll try to get it answered. Challenges in merging clients HR to FO and with payroll third-party UK. I'm assuming that this means that you're having challenges with merging clients. I'm not really sure what the question is here. Maybe I'll just take a minute or two to talk a little bit about kind of if you have both HR and F&O, obviously merging that data between the two databases is certainly a complex task and activity. In terms of our plans, what we're looking to do is to build out more data entities to help support that merging process, and then creating data packages that put that data in the right sequence to do that migration of your data between your HR application and your finance and operations application. I don't know if that helps answer the question or not, but if not, please feel free to type in another question and we will get that answered as best as we can. Someone asked, how can candidates apply documents for verify and HR direct find in F&O? I'm not sure if I understand this question. I don't know, Sheila or Angela, if you understand what's being asked here.
I wonder if it's submitting documents for a background check or in finance. I'm not sure. It's not, I'm not sure what the question is. It's something about applying documents for verification and then finding them in finance. I think you covered that already, that once you can attach the documents to the candidate, but those do not flow through when you create the employee.
Yeah. So if that doesn't answer the question, please feel free to try to clarify and ask again, and we'll give it another shot. Someone asked, what challenges might we expect during the merge? Wow, that's a loaded question. That's a really big one. Obviously, let me just put it this way. There's still a lot to be determined about the merge. We're still working, and the FastTrack team is working very closely with the product team to kind of determine what the shape of that merge looks like, and what we're planning to do. We are certainly trying to identify risks and issues, things that you might find. And there's certainly going to be differences for HR standalone customers versus customers that have both HR and F&O. We do expect that HR only customers, that migration is going to be a little bit more simple. We're kind of terming it lift and shift. And it's for HR only customers, it's going to be a little bit more like a true infrastructure kind of shift. We do know for HR customers, the URL of your environment will be changing because it's moving to a completely different infrastructure, different servers and so on. So the URL is changing. And this will obviously present the challenge for everyone, HR or HR plus F&O. If you have integrations with your HR environment, they will require some amount of rework to point them to the new environment. Theoretically, it should be similar to the process that you use to move an integration from, or point it to your test environment versus a production environment. We have kind of committed that we're not going to be making any breaking changes. So the structure of your data, the structure of the code, the functionality that you have today will all remain. We aren't getting rid of any functionality, with very few exceptions, like the Ceridian integration is being deprecated. The current Dataverse sync is being deprecated in favor of dual write. So there's certainly going to be a few minor things like that you'll experience. For the merge, we're still trying to work through what exactly that looks like. And, as more information is available, expect that we will be publishing more TechTalks next year when we're closer to having a better answer. We're really just in the beginning stages of kind of shifting our focus from merging all of the functional code into kind of, okay, now how do we migrate people to the new infrastructure? So hopefully that answers the question. I know it's a little bit vague, and a little bit of, we'll talk more about it next year. We're not expecting to start the migration process, or I should say the merging process for customers that have both HR and F&O before the fall of next year. So you still have plenty of time. We're not, doing anything crazy, shutting the HR service down at the, as soon as 26 is released or anything like that. And expect that we will have more documentation and guidance around both the HR only migration path and the HR plus F&O. But I think that the biggest thing that we know right now is that no matter what, integrations are going to be affected because the URL of your environment is changing. All right, so I think we've answered all the questions. Obviously, if you do have more questions, feel free to reach out, contact us with any of those questions that you have. If you've got ideas, we encourage you to get those out on the ideas website. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to David to wrap us up today. So thank you everyone for attending. Please do take the time to fill out those surveys. It really does help us make sure that we're doing the right thing and presenting the information that's most important to you. So thank you everyone. Over to you, David.
Excellent. Thank you, Rachel. I've posted a link to the short survey that Rachel mentioned in the Q&A panel. We'd like your feedback on today's session and hear what you'd like to hear in future events. Thank you for your participation. As a reminder, the recording of today's session will be available on the TechTalks Community Dynamics page within 5 business days. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenters and audience for joining us today.